If, like me, you can't sleep at night due to always thinking about dangling Doctor Who plot threads, then the 14th Doctor has probably stolen a fair bit of shut-eye from you since December. The man is literally sat there in Donna's house playing Mario Kart and wolfing down Sylvia's tuna madras. But what, if anything, is going to happen next? Now, whether one of these things happens, or a few of these things happen, or none of these things happen, it's still fun to speculate what the 14th Doctor is going to get up to in the coming years, right? So here are some of our theories. Number 10. Hired by UNIT. If it's a bit of extraterrestrial action that the 14th Doctor is after, well, the easy option would be to stay on Earth and let the aliens come to him, as he did during his exile in the 70s. Or was it the 80s? He could even resume his role as UNIT's scientific advisor. On the one hand, UNIT does seem to have had a glut of scientific advisors recently. I mean, in the last year alone, we've been introduced to Shirley Ann Bingham and Maurice Gibbons, and presumably Osgood and Malcolm are still kicking around somewhere too. We hope. But on the other hand, Kate would no doubt find him a position somewhere if he did ask for it. Also, Kate seems to offer everyone a job these days. She's already extended invitations to all of the companion support group and Susan Triad, and seems to have no problem recruiting literal children either. Kate also managed to persuade Donna to work at UNIT, granting her a 120k salary just on the basis that she could identify a simple arpeggio. Now, who's to say that the 14th Doctor didn't join her? He'd absolutely love the chance to work alongside his best mate. And I think UNIT might need a little bit more help with the Sea Devils in the war between the land and the sea. Now here's the thing, if we are going to see the return of 14, then I do feel as though a cameo within UNIT might be the most likely and logical way. Now in my headcanon, it makes total sense for him to be helping Kate out at UNIT. Why not use what's at your disposal? He literally has all of this knowledge. Why would they not use that? And I think he would give it willingly. And also, I just like the idea of him having a job. I can just imagine Donna, 14, and Mel doing carpool to work every morning. That I would love to see. Number 9, he becomes the Valeyard. 1986's season-long story, The Trial of a Time Lord, introduced the Valeyard, an amalgamation of the Doctor's darkest qualities who fits somewhere between his 12th and final incarnations. Now, at the time, it had been established that Time Lords could regenerate a maximum of 12 times, and as such, final meant 13. Now these days, in light of the meta-crisis and the War Doctors, plus the Doctor's second regeneration cycle, things are a bit more complicated. However, if we take final to mean the Doctor's final ever incarnation, including all regeneration cycles, then the Valeyard could come about any point after the 10th Doctor's regeneration in the end of time. So is the 14th Doctor a likely candidate for that? On the one hand, it's hard to imagine such a happy and fulfilled Doctor going rogue. But then again, he could become bitter and vindictive in old age, especially once his newfound family is no longer around. The last time that a Tenant Doctor was on his own, he wasn't exactly well behaved, was he? And wouldn't it be an amazing hook for the show if the Doctor was the villain of the season? You know, we've seen plenty of multi-Doctor stories before, but never one quite like that. Plus, David Tennant plays evil really well, as we saw in Marvel's Jessica Jones. I don't think this is likely to happen. If we were to see a familiar face take on the role of the Valeyard, then I could see it being David Tennant, but not as 14, if that makes sense. But I do think that it could be interesting to see if perhaps becoming the Valeyard could be a long-term side effect of bigeneration. You know, we know nothing really about bigeneration, so who knows what the long-term effects of that could be. You know, if the Doctor is essentially split in two, which he was, and 15 is the free spirit, then what would happen if the other half started to turn bad over time? I don't necessarily think it is going to happen, but I kind of like the idea of it. Number 8, he dies of old age. Like so many of the finer details of bigeneration, mortality is a bit of a grey area. Now, it's implied that the bigenerated Doctors keep going forever, aging naturally along the way, thus allowing past Doctor actors to return without having to explain why they look older, as we saw in Tales of the TARDIS. And we don't even know if these Doctors can regenerate themselves. So is there a point at which they just die? Maybe the 14th Doctor is essentially mortal now. Maybe he ages as a human does and dies as a human does. Maybe that's the cost of bigeneration. The new model gets all those sweet Time Lord perks, while the old model kind of withers away at an accelerated rate. And if the 14th Doctor really is as retired as we're meant to believe he is, then he's going to want to live out his final few decades in peace. Alternatively though, if the bi-generated Doctors really are as mortal as the rest of us, they could easily die before their time, as a result of injury or accident. I mean, the 10th Doctor did once joke that he might be killed by something as simple and anticlimactic as tripping over a brick. For the 14th Doctor, that might actually be a real possibility.
Hope I don't just trip over a brick, that'd be embarrassing. Then again, painless.
Now, morbid as this may sound, I actually think that this would be a nice ending for 14's story. I think it also adds more value to this kind of normal life that he's now living. You know, if there's no guarantee of survival, then surely he will cherish everything much more deeply and appreciate his journey rather than take it for granted. Also, if he just outlives all of his friends and family, won't that just cause him to spiral back into the same position he was in before the bi-generation and just undo the whole point of the bi-generation in the first place? Maybe that's what happens, and then he becomes the Valeyard. All of these theories link together. Number 7, a therapy tour. Ordinarily, the Doctor is constantly moving forwards from one thing to the next. Now, they've met many people, but they aren't always able to give them the time that they deserve. And likewise, they've made many mistakes, but they never really have the time to go back and fix them. But none of that applies to the 14th Doctor. In fact, the whole point of his rehab, as the 15th Doctor puts it, is to pause and reflect and work on himself. And what better way to do that than by making amends with old friends? Famously, the 10th Doctor checked in on all of his former companions right before he regenerated. In a similar vein, paying visits to old friends and acquaintances, particularly those that he has unfinished business with, would be a perfect way for the 14th Doctor to exorcise some demons. And Lord knows he owes Ursula Blake an apology for the whole paving slab situation. If we were then to include unfinished business with the Doctor's other incarnations, the list could go on forever. On the one hand, it would be lovely for 14 to be able to revisit lost friends and make amends for his mistakes. But on the other hand, I could easily see him getting very consumed by his need to keep revisiting the past and revisiting people who he has wronged, and that taking over his newfound life, and also that feeling of failure if he can't locate someone, he can't find someone to make amends. I always found that 10's farewell tour actually made his departure harder for himself. Perhaps actually the best form of therapy is for him to focus on forgiving himself rather than seeking forgiveness from other people. Oh, that got deep. Number 6, he regenerates into the 15th Doctor. So if bi-generation really did affect the Doctor's previous incarnations, then Doctors 1 to 14 are all still out there and always will be. Or to paraphrase the Sarah Jane Adventures, their stories go on forever. However, the giggle also suggests that the bi-generated Doctors don't have endless lifespans and aren't entirely independent of one another, with the 15th Doctor telling the 14th that he's only stable because you fixed yourself. As such then, despite the whole point of bi-generation being that the outgoing Doctor keeps trucking on rather than being replaced, we can't discount the possibility that the 14th Doctor merges into 15 at some point in the future. Now that certainly would give more weight to the idea that the 14th Doctor's so-called rehab directly then contributes to his successor's improved emotional state. It would also allow the evolution of previous incarnations to be maintained. For instance, the 10th Doctor being more carefree as a result of the 9th Doctor being healed by Rose, or the 13th Doctor being more outgoing as a result of the 12th Doctor coming to terms with his mortality. The only question would be what the regeneration actually looks like. Would 14 start to glow and then be pulled back through time to his regeneration in the giggle, or would he just fade away like Yoda? Who knows? Now, I'm not gonna lie, this is the area of bi-generation that absolutely frazzles my brain and makes me start to not like the whole concept of it. It's very confusing and there are a lot of unanswered questions. My gut response would be that I don't think this would happen, but then the suggestions of the scripts themselves say that it must happen. So then I'm confused. But personally, I think I'd rather the dying of old age theory and the Doctor living a normal life rather than ending his normal life by being dragged back to the moment of his so-called death. Number 5, he regenerates into another Doctor. What if the 14th Doctor does regenerate, but into a whole other Doctor? Now, as established, the premise of the bi-generation is that the Doctor's previous incarnations carry on existing, each in their own splinter timeline. But what if it's bigger than that? What if the bi-generated Doctors all regenerate into additional incarnations, creating a massive web of Doctor variants? Now, in the Prime timeline, Paul McGann regenerates into John Hurt, but perhaps in an alternate timeline, the bi-generated 8th Doctor becomes Rowan Atkinson, and in another timeline, the bi-generated 7th Doctor becomes an alternate 8th Doctor, who in turn becomes Richard E. Grant. Now, this would mean that the 14th Doctor could regenerate into literally anyone, not just Ncuti Gatwa, which would then also solve the problem of what 14's regeneration would look like. He doesn't then have to be pulled back through time to the events of the Giggle, he just regenerates normally wherever he is. I don't think I'd ever want to see this theory realised on screen, but I do like the concept of established alternate incarnations like Richard E. Grant, for example, being the result of a bi-generation incarnation regenerating. But it still frazzles my brain. Number 4, Partners in Time. As well as opening the door for a return in the main show, Bi-Generation provided the perfect setup for a 14th Doctor spin-off. Prior to Doctor Who's 60th anniversary specials, fans were expecting a short but sweet reunion for the Doctor and Donna, with the pair eventually parting ways once again. But now we know that their adventures continue, so why not show that on screen? Given how popular Tennant and Tate are, and how much they enjoy working together, a Doctor Donna spin-off would be a no-brainer. And it wouldn't just be more of the same either. You know, Doctor Who would still be a typical time-space adventuring, while the 14th spin-off could be strictly Earth-based, like Torchwood was. This would then differentiate it from the main show while also making the spin-off cheaper and easier to film. And look, no disrespect to the war between the land and the sea, which is still an absolute mouthful of a title, by the way, but this is a spin-off that would get people buzzing, and it would be a guaranteed ratings hit to boot. Why not take the easy and obvious win that's literally sitting there in your backyard? You don't see Star Wars doing a bloody Tusken Raiders spin-off. You see them bringing back Ewan McGregor as Obi-Wan Kenobi. You see Star Trek bringing back Patrick Stewart as Picard. Why is the Whoniverse not utilising its big guns too? Okay, yes. This would be absolutely a surefire success. I, for one, would 100% be buzzing for more Dr. Donna content. But if it is going to happen, then they need to wait. If they keep bringing back David Tennant every year, his return loses significance. The reason everyone was so excited for the 60th was because it was new and exciting and unexpected. But if it becomes predictable, then it loses that power and its draw. Wait. Wait quite a while. Wait years before we even consider that as a possibility. Also, I feel like having a spin-off with David Tennant and Catherine Tate just completely undermines and overshadows the main show and Ncuti Gatwa's stint in the role. Yes, personally, I'd love to see it for the nostalgia value and the fact that I love the dynamic between Catherine Tate and David Tennant and their roles. But on the other hand, is that the right avenue to go down? I'm not sure. Number 3, he dies in action. Now, one elephant in the room that we haven't quite touched upon is the 14th Doctor's TARDIS, a carbon copy of the original, minus Sutekh, we assume, granted to him thanks to one final gift from the Toymaker. As such, although this Doctor is supposedly retired, he actually still has access to all of time and space. He's already enjoyed a short trip to Mars and the Gilded Age of New York. However, if the 14th Doctor is indeed mortal, like we previously suggested, then he needs to be extra careful on those adventures. Without his former regenerative abilities, it is entirely possible that he could go off on an adventure and not come back alive. Russell T Davies even actually suggested as much, joking in an interview that, quote, "I think he's dead. I'm going to start saying that. He went to Venice 2063 when the city sank and he went into a whirlpool, which is really sad." Whether it's off-screen or on, a heroic death while saving innocent people is one of the most fitting ways for the Doctor to go out. And as I previously mentioned, the 14th Doctor is already adventuring, so he's bound to get into a scrape at some point. Hopefully it isn't off-screen though, that would be slightly anticlimactic. I actually do prefer the idea that he's now mortal and that he has to learn how to live like that. Now, I'd prefer that he didn't suffer an awful death, but I do like the idea that he kind of maintains his moral code and he would still sacrifice himself despite his mortality. That feels very Doctor-like. But also, please don't make me watch the Doctor die again, especially David Tennant's version of the Doctor. No, we don't need to see that again. Number 2, he becomes the Curator. Now, the Valeyard isn't the only established character that the 14th Doctor could eventually become. 10 years before Regeneration entered the equation, Doctor Who's 50th anniversary special gave us the Curator. This mysterious figure, strongly implied to be a future iteration of the Doctor, hinted that the Doctor might find himself revisiting old faces in years to come. Hence why he looks suspiciously like the Doctor's 4th incarnation. Now, in retrospect, this scene actually brilliantly predicts the existence of the 14th Doctor. But the parallels don't end there. As well as resembling previous incarnations, both characters are apparently retired and living in present-day London, which then begs the question, could the Curator actually be the 14th Doctor? Now, given how little is known about the Curator, it's not 100% clear how this would work, but it has been established on audio that he's not just limited to one form. So far, he's also adopted the guise of an older 6th Doctor as well, so it's entirely possible that he once wore the face of the 10th Doctor. Maybe 14 regenerates into the Curator. Now, they're not in the same time period, so some timey-wimey shenanigans would have to be at play for 14 to end up in the art gallery in 2013, but that's what the TARDIS is for. Who knows, eh? Who knows? You know what? I kind of like the idea of the 14th Doctor becoming a Curator, but not the same Curator. Now hear me out. I like to think that maybe this is how every bi-generated incarnation ends their journey. They all live a fulfilled mortal life, and then they all go on to become the Curator in their respective Doctorverse. Almost as if it's written into their bi-generated code, that this is your final destiny, to become the Curator. No matter what universe you're in, the Doctor is always destined to bi-generate and become the Curator. Number 1. Trenenzalore. The name of the Doctor took us further into the Doctor's future than ever before, establishing his supposed final resting place as the planet Trenenzalore. 2 stories later, we return to Trenenzalore, at an earlier time, with the 11th Doctor taking up residence in the town of Christmas to protect it from various alien invaders. Now, one implication is that the version of Trenenzalore that we see in The Name of the Doctor was part of an alternate timeline where the Doctor's efforts were unsuccessful. But that's not to say that he won't end up being buried there when he eventually does die. Or what if the 14th Doctor is the one who winds up on Trenenzalore? He's been there. He's seen his grave. Maybe he'll just feel when the time is right, and maybe he just heads there of his own volition. There's even a through line with this image of a colossal monument-esque TARDIS. 14 actually mentions something similar to this in Wild Blue Yonder while talking about what happens to his ship when he's gone. Now, it's a pretty grim idea, albeit one that becomes more and more plausible the more you start to think about it. I much prefer the idea that 14 has settled into a normal life and is no longer burdened by great foreboding destinies and prophecies. The whole idea is that this version is free from the stress of being the Doctor, while 15 continues that journey. So if anyone is heading for Trenenzalore, then I'd say that it's the, for lack of a better word, the real Doctor. Now don't come for me, I know they're all real, but you know what I mean. Anyway, there's our theories. But we have had plenty of theories about all sorts of things, so do make sure that you check out our theories playlist. In the meantime, I've been Ellie for WhoCulture, and in the words of Riversong herself, goodbye, sweeties.